me see, said Harold. Don't look directly at it, warned George. You don't want to get hypnotized, do you? Do you really think it will work? Asked Harold. Do you think we can amaze our friends, control our enemies, and take over the world just like the ad says? It better work, said George, or else we just wasted 4 whole bucks. Chapter 10. The 3D Hypno Ring. The next morning, George and Harold didn't arrive early at Mr. Krupp's house to wash his car or reshingle his roof. In fact, they were even a little late getting to school. When they finally showed up, Mr. Krupp was standing in the front door waiting for them. And boy, was he mad. Mr. Krupp escorted the boys into his office and slammed the door shut. All right, where were you two this morning? He growled. We wanted to come over to your house, said George, but we were busy trying to figure out the secret of this ring. What ring? Snapped Mr. Krupp. George held his hand up and showed Mr. Krupp and showed the ring to Principal Krupp. It's one of those weird patterns. It's got one of those weird patterns on it, said Harold. If you stare at it long enough, a picture will appear. Well, hold it still, snarled Mr. Krupp. I can't see the darn thing. I have to move it back and forth, said George, or else it won't work. Mr. Krupp's eyes followed the ring, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. You have to stare deeper into the ring, said Harold. Deeper, deeper, deeper. You're getting sleepy, said George. Very sleepy. Mr. Krupp's eyelids began to droop. I'm so sleepy. Mr. Krupp's eyelids began to close. He mumbled. After a few minutes, Mr. Krupp's eyes were closed tight, and he began to snore. You're under our spell, said George. When I snap my fingers, you will obey every command. Snap! I will obey, mumbled Mr. Krupp. All right, said George. You still have that videotape of me and Harold? Yes, mumbled Mr. Krupp. Well, hand it over, bub, George instructed. Mr. Krupp unlocked the large file cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. He reached in and handed George the videotape. George stuffed the videotape into his backpack. Harold took a different video out of his backpack and put it into the file cabinet. What video is that? Asked George. It's one of my little sister's old Boomer the Purple Dragon sing-along videos. Nice touch, said George. Chapter 11. Fun with Hypnosis. When Harold bent down to close the file cabinet, he took a quick look inside. Whoa! He cried. Look at all the stuff in here. The file cabinet was filled with everything Mr. Krupp had taken away from the boys over the years. There were slingshots, whoopee cushions, skateboards, fake doggy doo-doo. You name it, it was in there. Look at this, cried George. A big stack of Captain Underpants comic books. He's got every issue, said Harold. For hours, the boys sat on the floor laughing and reading their comics. Finally, George looked up at the clock. Yikes, he said. It's almost lunchtime. We'd better clean up this mess and get to class. The boys looked up at their principal, who had been standing behind them in a trance all morning. Gee, I almost forgot about Mr. Krupp, said Harold. What should we do with him? Do you want to have some fun with him? Asked George. Why not? Said Harold. I haven't had any fun for the last 4 to 6 weeks. Cool, said George. He walked up to Mr. Krupp and snapped his fingers. You're a chicken, he said. Suddenly, Mr. Krupp leaped onto his desk and flapped his arms. He cried, kicking his papers off the desk behind him and pecking at his pens and pencil set. George and Harold howled with laughter. Let me try, said Harold. You're a monkey. You gotta snap your fingers, said George. Oh yeah, said Harold. You're a monkey. Suddenly, Mr. Krupp sprang off of his desk and began swinging from the fluorescent light fixtures. He shrieked, leaping from one side of the room to the other. George and Harold laughed so hard they almost cried. My turn, said George. Let's see. What should we turn him into next? Yeah, I know, Harold said, holding up a Captain Underpants comic. Let's turn him into Captain Underpants. Good idea, said George. You are now the greatest hero of all time, the amazing Captain Underpants. Mr. Krupp tore down the red curtain from his office window and tied it around his neck. He then took off his shoes, socks, shirt, pants, and his awful toupee. Tra-la-la, he sang. Mr. Krupp stood up before them looking quite triumphant, with his cape blowing in the breeze of the window. George and Harold were dumbfounded. You know, said George, he kind of looks like Captain Underpants. Yeah, said Harold. After a short silence, the two boys looked at each other and burst into laughter. Harold and George had never laughed so hard in their lives. Tears ran down their faces as they rolled out about the floor, shrieking in hysterics. After a while, George pulled himself up from the floor and looked around. Hey, George cried. Where'd he go? Well, that was our chapters for today, everybody. Captain Underpants, I thank you very much for hanging out with me today. Don't forget the summer reading is coming up, so please check out your stuff from the public library. We can't wait to see you guys next week. Have a great time. See ya. Peace out.